Welcome back to News in Focus. Another election on the continent of Africa and another leader that will stay for more years in power. Veteran President Yoweri Museveni was declared the landslide winner of Uganda's presidential elections over the weekend. Now, this extends his rule into a fifth decade after a contest marred by violent incidents and allegations of fraud. The result hands the 81-year-old Museveni the decisive victory he sought to bolster his political position as speculations mounts about his eventual successor. Joining me now to take this conversation forward, I'd like to welcome Advocate Sipho Mantula, who's a researcher at the Thabo Mbeki African School on Public and International Affairs. Advocate, always good to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting us to be part of this topical debate in the continent. Remember, 2026 is a super year electioneering. There are many elections, and Uganda begins 2026 at that high note.
Yeah, I know, without a doubt. Advocate, anyone who thought that Museveni was just going to say, okay, you know what, I'm leaving my position, or whatever the result is going to be, if we were to take opposition comments that it's time for a new start in Uganda, would be a fool, wouldn't they? This was always going to happen, Advocate, wasn't it?
Absolutely. We can write this script that most of the African leaders are now enjoying sitting into office for too long, even if there is the will of the electorates or the voters. When we look at the elections of Uganda, one needs to understand the history that it was since 2005 that Uganda started to have multi-party democracy. We've been seeing what we call the one-party state or what we call liberation movement dominating governments. And when you look at this stage that we are in, one will say that beyond social media protest, beyond picketing by the supporters of Bobby Wine in the Uganda High Commission here in South Africa, we are in the stage where people must lodge petitions, what we call electoral dispute petitions, because that's where you are able to contest the law. You are able to test the efficiency of the Electoral Commission. The issue of electoral rigging and fraud will always come, and it will always stay, because we don't have systems that are able to arrest such situations, because that's where you see in Uganda how you look at the patterns. Pre-electioneering, during campaigns, during elections, there were challenges. Post-elections, we have numbers of people who have lost their lives. So I think in Africa, we are taking elections as a matter of life and death. It's a matter of power and power mongering. And it's the issue of also trying to stifle the multi-party democracy. Hence, you look at the numbers, that the numbers gave him an overwhelming majority in terms of those other other six candidates who were even contesting with the elder Yoweri Museveni. So in short, I am trying to say to you, yes, we have seen changes in other African countries. We saw Malawi just recently, Chakwera losing. We saw Edgar Lungu, the late Edgar Lungu, losing to Hakainde Hichilema. We've seen the transfer of political power in most of the African countries, but in some instances, there is always a protest, there's always a revolution, there is always a military coup, and those are the effects that we are seeing in 2026 also.
72%, Advocate. And of course, this has been contested, especially by Bobby Wine, the former entertainer, now turned politician. I guess when you look at it, should we as citizens of the continent be concerned when we look at that percentage there and asking ourselves, can we trust the sort of impartiality of this counting of the votes, given what history has suggested to us, especially from a Ugandan context?
Absolutely, but let's not go far. Tanzania, remember that President Samia Suluhu got more than 90%, and there was a concern around the independence of the Electoral Commission. When I look at the preliminary report of the African Union Election Observer Mission and COMESA, they have flagged it already, this issue of the independence of the commission. They flagged the issue of the playing field not being level in terms of media coverage. They flagged the issue also of intimidation and the issue of the cutting of internet 2 days before.
Yeah.
So they have flagged many issues, even if some of us were worried about that. Will the African citizens or voters trust the African Union Election Observer Mission? Will they trust electoral management bodies? What we see, it is voter apathy. If you look at the numbers now in Uganda, 52% went to the polls. So that shows you that numbers have gone down. And others are alleging that the numbers that President Museveni has belongs to Bobby Wine.
Yeah.
But you can only prove it when you take it to the court. Hence, I will go back to Kenya. When I was part of the observer mission in Kenya in 2017, those election results were nullified by the then Chief Justice Maraga. So one, like I said earlier, I still emphasize, test the rule of law or the courts of Uganda, whether they will adjudicate this presidential disputes. We had a long dispute in Mozambique, we had a dispute in Namibia. Now we see another dispute arising in Uganda. And hence I said to you, for us, this is a stage of what I call electoral dispute resolution. And even if we are not certain with the independence of judiciary, it is always good to can test the waters and see whether is judiciary also in collusion or in colluding and causing collusion of electoral irregularities. Because here we are sitting with electoral irregularities, we are sitting with youth apathy, we are sitting with women who are in high numbers when you have the numbers of voters, but women are nowhere to be seen in terms of leadership. So this is a challenge that when you look at Uganda, like I said, we have seen that script already in Tanzania with the high numbers. We have seen it in Rwanda. So these numbers, you can even ask yourself, are they being generated by computer? Is it the real numbers that when you look at Museveni yesterday, he said the 10 million of my members, they didn't come and vote. I will have got a 90%. So you can see the hypocrisy of even those who are even contesting power. They are also certain about their numbers whenever there is elections.
Here's an interesting take on this, Advocate Mantula. Can the judiciary be trusted in Uganda? The reason why I ask this is that if you look at the rhetoric of Museveni, you know, it's very difficult to sort of separate himself from the judiciary. And you mentioned testing the waters, but would anyone dare test the waters of the courts in Uganda, given what we have seen now over the last few days, protests, cutting of the internet, Bobby Wine's house being raided? It's a difficult situation for anyone to go to Museveni and say, we'll take you to court over this results.
Yeah, but that is their electoral judicial process that allows that every after election results have been pronounced, others will accept, others will reject. And when you reject, you have been given opportunity to bring petition. Now you are raising an important issue. The previous election, they were lodged against the independence of judiciary also, to say if they are assessing presidential disputes, will they be fair, will they be impartial, looking at the separation of powers, that the executive, the parliament, and the judiciary must be independent. But in many African countries, we have seen how the chief justices who are adjudicating these cases are being put under pressure because they have to decide a constitutional and a political process. And in some instances, they have been compromised and they have been called counter-revolutionaries. I used the case of Kenya earlier. The Chief Justice of Kenya, after that ruling, he was not considered for the second term by Uhuru Kenyatta. He was left out in the cold. You look in many African countries, whenever there is a Chief Justice who's vocal, they will either be anti this move of government to intimidate them, or they will be pro the constitutional interpretation of an electoral dispute. Hence, I said to you, even the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the African Court, because one has to look at the levels also of if you failed at the national level when you have lodged a dispute, where in the continent are we able to adjudicate presidential disputes, because they are going to become a serious concern and a serious challenge in the coming years. I don't think me and you, we are maybe debating this only now, because here we are talking about political power of the seat of the president. And that's where in most instances, even judges become biased. Judges, they don't become independent. Judges also are caught up by the social noise that is out there and the political pressure. And hence I said to you, probably in the continent, we might need to have an electoral tribunal. In the regional levels also, we might need to have an electoral tribunal. What happens if East Africa community does not agree with these election results? Because I have already mentioned, African Union and COMESA Observer Mission report have flagged them out to say there were serious challenges, and that also compromises the standard of elections, and they also compromise the independence of the electoral management bodies.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Advocate Sipho Mantula. Yoweri Museveni is 81 years old. He should be somewhere on a beach, relaxing. But no, he wants to continue taking charge of Uganda. What does that speak about leadership? And of course, whether this is linked to the sort of dependence on liberation movements for them to lead their respective countries. My conversation continues after this break. Welcome back. I'm starting conversation with Advocate Sipho Mantula, who's the researcher at the Thabo Mbeki African School on Public and International Affairs. Advocate Mantula, just after winning the elections, Museveni had called his opposition, quote unquote, terrorists who tried to use violence to overturn the election results. I don't think he would have said anything else, would he?
Absolutely, but remember, these are the politics of an incumbent, is the politics of an elder. And as you said earlier, age is nothing but a number in this continent. Look at Paul Biya, he's at the age of 92 in Cameroon. Now Museveni at 81, and that issue that you raise of the relevance of the liberation movements and the question also of not allowing multi-party democracy. I looked actually before the elections, this senior advisor was already raising the issue that the Electoral Commission will not declare Bobi Wine, it will declare Museveni. So you can see that they had already their political machinery of media hype. You look at like I said earlier, the media coverage of opposition was very low. If you land in Kampala airport, in the international airport, there were already posters of President Museveni at the national cheap point. So you can see the level of intimidation. Campaigns for Bobi Wine and others were not allowed in some of the areas. So that's where you find that even if you label other people, it will remind me of what Toni Morrison will say, that definition belongs to the definers, but not to the defined. So those who are defining and labeling others, it's always important to justify when you say others are electoral terrorists, because what President Museveni is saying is raising innuendos and alleging, because remember, this happened actually even last year during elections in Tanzania, where he was worried already with this Generation Z. Hence, we see today the post-election violence taking place in different areas, and there is a low media coverage about them.
Advocate, the raiding of Bobi Wine's house, the violence that is happening pre and post the elections, but the one that's of concern is the cutting off of the internet. Now, I must confess, we had tried to get somebody from Uganda to speak on this. Unfortunately, this could not happen because of the internet cutoff. How concerned should we be, Advocate Mantula? Now, I know this is happening in the east of our continent, but here we have an African Union that, of course, as you said, has flagged these results, and yet nothing happens in terms of concrete action. Now, no one's saying go in with an army and, of course, try and resolve the situation, but it makes dialogue very difficult, doesn't it? And actually holding the sort of Electoral Commission of Uganda accountable, including its judiciary, to try and make sure that this election, the one that we've had over the weekend, was actually free and fair and free from violence and press freedom?
Absolutely, but still on that same report, they have raised the issue of access to information. But government will want to counter, saying we were avoiding misinformation and disinformation, and we had exception. And that's where even observer missions, before they landed in Uganda, they have flagged it already to say, but how are we going to collect data and share it with our head offices? How are we going to analyze? How are we going to even connect from different regions, provinces to our what we'll call the operation center? And secondly, as you have mentioned, it is key for us to understand that, like I said, the AU is not the police of elections. They cannot be the judges of elections. Whenever we have observer mission reports, they become preliminary and you have a final report. Host countries and member states ignore recommendations of the AU.
Yeah.
And this has happened for many years. It's the same script that happened in 2021 when Bobi Wine was also arrested and there was the issue around the media coverage and the issue of the intimidation. So it seems that we are not learning. And there's a need to unlearn so that we may relearn. And hence I said to you, this is a challenge that the African Union chairperson was able to come out first, congratulate Museveni, saying they were peaceful. But when you read the observer mission report of the former President Goodluck Jonathan, it says something that there were challenges and it is too early.
But that's contradictory, isn't it? Sorry for cutting you there, advocate. So on one side, the AU chairperson will congratulate Museveni, but that very same report, his organization's chairing is saying there are problems with this. And this is a problem, isn't it? And what's it going to take for the African...
Even for us must not be shocked, because you must remember the son of President Ramaphosa is married in Uganda. We might follow the same. So I will assume that beyond us sending, because William Ruto, he has already sent a message, and there was some issues by the young people of Kenya say, we knew. President Samia Sulu, when he was confirmed, the AU chairperson jumped again, that gun of congratulations. And the AU report from former president of Botswana, Mokgweetsi Masisi, flagged it, said, no, they did not pass the standards of norms and values of elections. Again, we see it happening. And that's where the issue of African president rushing to appraise their colleagues and their friends and their league, because this is where the African politics becomes frustrating, confusing, even electorates, because this is the time where you need to look around the peaceful environment and the transition of political power. And even if you have re-elected President Museveni, now is the national interest of Uganda that comes first, but not of the party. And that's where we are missing that point. And you were correct earlier about the deficit of the liberation movement. If you had 52% of the voter turnout and you have only 7 million votes that confirm President Museveni, and you look at the difference with even the opposition, it is vast. It is again showing that there's a low deficit and trust of our electoral institutions. And hence I was saying earlier, we need to reboot. We need to reconfigure our electoral commissions, and we need to have an independent judiciary, and we need to have a free media, and we don't have to work on this internet shutdown, because also it raises the doubts and the suspicions of rigging. Even if it's difficult for us, if I can tell you from law, when I was in Zimbabwe, they say, but what is rigging? How do you define electoral rigging? So we said in law, it's electoral fraud or electoral irregularity, but you can't use the word rigging. You know, was one former minister in Zimbabwe, Patrick Chinamasa. He used to say, what is this word electoral rigging? It's not even in the vocab or even in the a wedding of electoral offenses. But hence I said to you, it's important that we don't become silent when there are problems, because it's the youth of Uganda who will suffer post these elections. There will be riots, there will be protests, there will be unlawful arrest, and there will be the attempt on affecting economic growth of that country, because normally post elections, it's economic growth that must thrive and that must benefit everyone.
He's talking of economic growth. One final question, Advocate Mantula. Like Paul Biya, Museveni has convinced Uganda that he'll take them to the promised land. Museveni says they're going to tap into the oil industry. They've got this 1,443-kilometer pipeline. Wink, wink, US President Donald Trump. There's oil in Uganda. Let's see what he does there. I'm only kidding. Advocate Mantula, his supporters buy into this. I'm talking of Museveni. They buy into the fact that an 81-year-old man who's now 50 or over 40 years in power can still take them to economic prosperity and be a powerhouse in East Africa.
But remember, his voters are the members of his party, the oldest party, also the National Resistance Movement. Those are the members who have elected Museveni from the party to become a candidate. They are the ones who believe in the manifesto of the party, which has to translate into the national development plan of the country. My only concern is that even if you are looking at economic growth and you are raising an important issue of the oil, what we call natural resources in Africa that are now driving conflicts, and they are bringing foreign powers, it will be the same what we see in the Eastern Congo. And Museveni, if you look at his circle, he had made sure that he's doing the dynasty. He's doing in the name of the father, of the wife, of the son-in-law. So you have this trinity that goes beyond of even the power in the presidency. You look at the power in the military. It is of his family. And when you talk about the economic growth, you ask yourself, will they deal with youth unemployment? Will they deal with neighboring conflicts? How will they deal with trade deficit? And as you said, what will be the interest of the other superpowers when they see that there is a new oil that is pumping in Kampala? And those are the challenges that are facing African leaders, that natural resources of their country, they tend to make them their private companies and their private benefits. And that's why we are going to face many revolutions. Because I have said it before, Faraz, in many mediums, that we are facing Generation Z / military revolutions under military coups in the African continent. Elections are the push and the pull driver, because we are fighting for representation and there's a conflict. Every election will have a conflict in the continent, so long as we still privatize natural resources to can benefit our families and even our friends, and we lose the sight of national development and the national interest of the country. And that's why I said to you, we need to avoid dynasty in Africa. We need to move away from ageism. They are our elders, and we want intergenerational leadership in the continent.
Advocate, I have to stop you there because we have run out of time. Advocate Sipho Mantula, always good having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
That's Advocate Sipho Mantula, researcher at the Thabo Mbeki African School on public and international affairs. So that's all we have for you on News in Focus. From myself, Ross Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. If you missed today's episode, you will find it on our YouTube channel. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.